It's pumpkin season, which means we're making some pumpkins. Hello everybody, my name is Jenna and welcome to 3 Ways To. And today we are doing 3 different ways to make a pumpkin block. And it's kind of like a pumpkin block sampler. And if you've ever done a sampler quilt, then you know that each block you learn a new or different skill. First, we're starting with a traditionally pieced scrappy pumpkin block that we're gonna learn chain piecing on. Then we're gonna do a fun appliqué pumpkin block. And finally, we are gonna learn how to foundation paper piece. And to go along with this video, I've written a pattern for all 3 pumpkins. It is for free in the description below, so go click the link in the description. And remember to like and subscribe for more fun quilting content. Now, let's get into our pumpkins. We're starting off easiest with our traditionally pieced pumpkin, and there are some skills that we're gonna learn for this specific pumpkin piece. First, we've got our half square triangle pieces, and then we've got some snowballed pieces. And all of these finished block pieces are gonna be 2.5 inches unfinished. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna lay out all of our blocks like this. Our orange blocks for our pumpkin is gonna be in a 5 by 5 grid. And then you have your background blocks and your stem block. Then we're gonna make our half square triangles for the corners. And you're gonna take your 4 leftover background blocks. Then you're gonna draw a diagonal line down the center of all of the blocks. And we're gonna place them on top of our corner pieces. Then to make the half square triangle piece, you're gonna sew directly on that line you drew, and then you are gonna trim the piece 1/4 inch either to the right or to the left of that line. Then you can press it open, and once you press it open, you get something that looks like this. And you can repeat that step for all 4 corners. Now we are going to do our snowballed piece, and we're going to do our first snowballed pieces down here. And on your snowball blocks, just like your half square triangle blocks, you're going to draw a line right down the middle. And we're going to place these on the corners of the 2 middle pieces on the bottom. And we kind of want our triangle pieces to meet in the center like that. Then I can take this to my machine and sew directly on that line that we drew, cut 1/4 inch to the right, and then press that open. And then you'll get a block that looks kind of like this. And you'll do that to both of your bottom blocks. Then you can repeat those same steps with your top 2 orange blocks, except with a brown fabric or whatever you want to use as your stem fabric. On the back, you draw a diagonal line. You're gonna place these in the top center corners, making sure your triangle piece is pointing down. Then you can repeat that same process by sewing on the line that you drew, cutting to the right and pressing them open. And then you'll get something that looks like this. And the last piece we got to prepare for our pumpkin block before we can sew it all together is our stem piece. You're going to take your stem piece, place a background piece on top. Then you're going to sew 1/4 inch down the short sides of your stem piece. Then you're going to trim it directly in the center, which is 1 1/4 inches in. Then you can press your pieces open and you'll get 2 pieces that look like this. All of our pieces are now trimmed down and finished, and we can chain piece them. And to chain piece this together, you're going to take your second row and you're going to fold it on top of your first row. You're then going to stack all of these together, starting with the top row and going down. We can take these over to our machine, and we're going to sew 1/4 inch on the right side. Now you have your first chain, and do not cut the thread. This will keep it organized in the end. Now we're going to take our 3rd row, we're going to start at the top and stack them on top of each other. And we're going to take our chain and we're going to take them over to our machine. And when we go to sew this, you're going to start by opening up this first part, and you're going to fold your next piece right on top, sew it using 1/4 inch, and do that all the way down. Then you're going to repeat that with the rest of the columns until you have a piece that looks like this. And this is why they call it chain piecing, because you don't break the thread in between and it turns into like a giant chain of rows of fabric, and it's just so dang cute. Then from here, you can either cut your thread or keep it together. I like to keep it together just to keep my pieces a little bit more organized. And then you're gonna press your rows in alternating directions. So the first row, I'm gonna go this way, boom, 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 boom. Now we can fold our rows on top of each other and sew them together. And what's nice about pressing in alternate directions is you can match up your seams because they're going in different ways. Then we can do something called nesting your seams, which makes it super easy to line up your seams just because in one row there's more fabric on the left and on the other row there's more fabric on the right. And so it creates a little bump where you can just kind of nudge your seams against each other, your fabric against each other, and then you'll get a perfect seam. How nice is that? And then you'll go from having a chain piece block that looks like this to a finished block that looks like this. And what I love about chain piecing is it keeps all of your pieces nice and organized. And especially when you're doing a really large quilt, chain piecing will be your best friend. It will take some practice to learn, so that's why I like practicing chain piecing on smaller blocks, so then I can learn to keep my pieces organized. So when I go to bigger blocks, it makes it a lot easier. Now that we've started off a little bit easy, we're gonna jump up a difficulty level and make an appliqué pumpkin. We're jumping up a difficulty level with appliqué just because, in my opinion, it's not that hard, but it's something that, depending on the method you are doing, it can be a little bit more difficult, and it's something that a lot of quilters don't try just because they're afraid to. There are so many different styles of appliqué. There's raw edge appliqué, there's turn appliqué, there's reverse appliqué. Today, I am going to show you my favorite method of appliqué, which is Lori Holt's style of appliqué. And for Lori Holt's method of appliqué, she uses a sew-in interfacing, but I don't like to buy extra things when I don't need to buy extra things. So I do her method just with scrap fabric. First things we gotta do is cut out our template pieces, and these template pieces do not include seam allowance, and so I need to make sure to cut just roughly around the edges of these pieces. I'm gonna start with my background pumpkin piece, and I'm gonna start by layering my pumpkin piece and a random piece of fabric. I truly don't care. I like to do a white or cream piece of fabric just because it meshes well into things and it just hides easily. But you can do literally whatever you want. I just use scrap fabric, whatever's at home. You're gonna lay them right sides together. Then you're gonna lay your pumpkin template on top. Now we're gonna take it to our machine and we're gonna sew directly on that solid line for the pumpkin. And with this method, especially when there's curved pieces, you want smaller stitches. So I recommend anywhere from a 2 to a 1.8. You just want a super small stitch. And we're gonna stitch directly on that line. Beautiful. From here, we can carefully rip the paper off, and because we used really tiny stitches, our paper is perforated, so it should be pretty simple to get off. From here, you're going to trim your seam allowance around your pumpkin to a little less than 1/4 inch, and I love using a 28mm blade. And with this comfort cutter, there's no stress on my wrist, and I can just go around this thing easy peasy. Then whenever doing this style of applique, if there are any more pronounced curves, and I think for me, I would trim down these ones and this one in the center. I like to cut little notches that go right up to that seam line, but don't cut the thread. And this will just help it lay a little bit more flat when we're turning it right side out. And now here comes the fun part. You're thinking, wait, we sewed all the way around. How am I gonna turn this right side out? Well, I'm going to pull my two pieces apart, and whatever one is my background fabric or my fabric I don't care about, I'm gonna make sure to cut a little hole in the middle of that background fabric. Then I can stick my scissors in here a little bit better, and I like to cut kind of like a plus or an X. Then from here, I can take this and I can turn it right side out. And all of my nasty seams are stuck in the middle of this guy. I like to use a pen or any pointy object I have just to push my seams out. So I'll push it out and then I'll use my fingers to kind of flatten it. And then we can take this and press it just so that it lies nice and flat and we can't see any of that white fabric. Then you're gonna repeat this process with all of the other pieces of your pumpkin template. And when you go to trim down your leaves, I would recommend putting a lot more notches, and in the pointed part of that leaf, you're gonna wanna trim as close as you can to that seam without cutting that thread, just so that when we turn it right side out, there's not bulky fabric. Once you've repeated that process with all of your template pieces, you should have a large pumpkin piece, a small pumpkin piece, a stem, and 2 leaves. And then you need to cut a 12.5 by 12.5 inch background block. Now we're gonna layer these on top of each other. I'm gonna set my first pumpkin piece down, my oval one in the center. Then you can put your stem piece either on top of the pumpkin or kind of underneath the pieces. I kind of like the look of it on top. And then you're gonna add the leaves, and you can choose which side you want the leaves. I am going to put them on this side. I'm gonna place everything where I want it to be, and I wanna make sure that there is a similar distance from the pumpkin to the edge of the block on all sides. And right now it looks just about right. And then from here, I am gonna take all of these top pieces off, and I'm going to sew on my machine 1/8 of an inch around this block, just using a straight stitch. Then once this piece is sewn on, I can add my next shape and repeat that same process and sew 1/8 of an inch using a straight stitch around the edge. If you don't want to use a straight stitch, you can use a blanket stitch, a zigzag stitch, whatever you want. You can even hand sew these pieces on, but I just like using a machine. Then you're gonna do the next part of the layer and the final 2 leaves in your layering. And then finally, you've got a finished applique block that is absolutely beautiful. And in the pattern for this pumpkin applique block, I don't have the directions to do this specific style of applique. It's more, do the style of applique that you want, because everyone has different preferred methods of applique. But if you do want to do this method, come back to this video later, so then you can relearn how to do this specific style. Applique wasn't as hard as you thought, was it? Now we're jumping to a skill people in the quilting world find a little bit more intimidating, and that is foundation paper piecing. Foundation paper piecing is truly one of my favorite piecing, quilting skills, because you can get things more exact. And what foundation paper piecing is, or a lot of people call it FPP. FPP is sewing directly on to a paper template, and then you get more precise piecing. For this specific block, I know you can technically piece this using traditional piecing and it looked great, but I wanted to make it using foundation paper piecing so that you have a simple block to practice FPP with before you take it to a more difficult level. So if you're brand new to FPP, this is a great first block to start with. And we're starting off with our template pieces, and I have block A, block B, and then block C. And on the template pieces, block C is broken into 2 pieces. So you're gonna have to tape them together. And my favorite way to tape them together is on one side, I'm just gonna cut directly on the line, and then on the other side, I am going to cut 1/4 of an inch from the edge of that piece. And I'll just layer them on top of each other until they are matched up. And then I will tape them together. And now we're ready to use them. Let's start with just one of these blocks. And just for funsies, I'm gonna start with block B. And if you look at the way this block is labeled, we have a B1 in the center, and then it goes 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that's the order we're gonna sew our fabric in. When doing FPP, I like to prep my fabric ahead of time by cutting pieces that are generally around the same size of the piece that I'm gonna need. So for B1, 1 means we're gonna start by sewing this piece first. I'm going to want a piece that is around 1/4 to 1/2 an inch bigger than my FPP template. And with foundation paper piecing, you are quilting backwards, which is so much fun. It is complicated at first, but once you get it, it will become easier. I promise, I promise. It feels like a puzzle. I'm gonna flip this guy over, and I want this fabric to be my B1. So I'm gonna place it right on top of that area. And what I like to do is, if you look at where these edge lines are for this B1 piece, I like to make sure that my fabric is overlapping that by at least 1/4 inch. And one fun trick I like to do is I like to look at the light. So I'll put this guy up to the light, and then I can see the fabric of where the shadow ends or overlaps, and I can see that this is overlapping by at least 1/2 inch, which is great. Okay, so that is exactly where we need it to be. And sometimes when you have a big first piece like this, I like to use a little bit of glue. So I'll lift my piece up, add a little dab of glue, kind of pat that into place, or I'll even iron it into place. Then it won't shift as much and it will still be easy to rip the paper off later. Now we're gonna add our part 2. So our part 2 is gonna go on this side right here, and we're gonna do what we would normally do. So I'm going to lay that on top of each other, right sides together. Then I can flip this guy over. Now I can take it to my sewing machine and I'm gonna sew directly on this line. And with foundation paper piecing, you wanna use a short stitch length. So I like to do a 1.8, but truly nothing bigger than a 2. The smaller, the better for this guy. So I've sewn directly on that line, and if I fold it up, I can see that my seam allowance is about 1/4 inch there, so I am good to go. I don't need to trim anything down. Now I can take this piece and I can press it out. So you can press it with an iron or you can finger press it. So we've done 1 and 2, and now in our pattern, we're gonna go 3, then 4. Now we've gotta do our B3 piece, but how do I know where to put my B3 piece? Well, here is my little trick. You're gonna line up your ruler on that line that you are gonna sew later, and you're gonna fold that piece up and over on that line. Then, so I'll cut a nice 1/4 inch from that fold. I'll fold this guy back. Then I can flip it over and I'll take my next piece. Then for B3, I made sure to make it brown so that you knew this was for a stem piece. And then I can go ahead and line up my brown triangle right against the edge of the fabric that I cut. Then I'll take it back over to my machine and I'll sew directly on that line. Then after you've sewn it, you can press it up. After B3, I'm gonna do B4, and I'm gonna do that same process. So I'm gonna fold up that edge piece, fold it back, and I'm going to trim it down by 1/4 inch. Then I can see this is white, so it's my background square. And I can take one of my background pieces, line it up, and sew directly on that line. We're halfway done with our first piece, and the hardest part about foundation paper piecing, in my opinion, is that it's kind of like quilting backwards. And so I find a lot of times I'll accidentally piece the wrong side down and then come to flip it over and my wrong side's facing up of my fabric. And so I recommend using a batik. My first FPP project was using a batik, so there was no way to get the wrong side of the fabric up, or you could use a solid because it's that same way. It doesn't matter. There's no right or wrong side of the fabric. Okay, we've done 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm gonna continue this process with 5, 6, and 7. So I'm going to fold this guy up. I'll cut 1/4 inch off that line. And this is where I find most people make the mistake. This piece is a woven, and so there is no wrong side. But when people place their pieces down, you want to make sure that it's right sides are touching. So right side, and then we are good to go. And your right side is always going to be facing out because with FPP, we are piecing backwards. Now I can take this and sew it on that line. I press it out, and then I'm going to continue the same process I did for B3 and B4 with B6 and B7. Our first block finished, and it's just so cute, except it's not the cutest it could be because we got to trim it down. So for this one, I just want to make sure to trim it down 1/4 inch past the edge of my pieces. On my template, I have a dotted line to show where that 1/4 inch is. Then you're going to repeat this process with all of your templates, and then we're going to sew them together. And so there's some tricks to sewing them together. So I'm going to start with my 2 halves of my pumpkin piece, and I want to lay one right on top of the other. And because I trimmed them down to size, they should line up perfectly. And so I'm just matching my B block to my A block, and then I can come right here and sew them together. And when sewing them together, I just know I need to sew directly on this black solid line. And ta-da, we got our first piece. Oh my goodness, I should have paid more attention to the order I was sewing these blocks in, because I definitely did not want these 2 blocks together, but oh well, my bad. It still looks cute. Before we sew the top piece on, here is what we are going to need to do. This 1/4 inch right here that we sewed, there is still paper on it. When we go to sew this block onto the next block, this paper is going to kind of get stuck in the seams, and it's going to be really annoying to remove later. So I like to pull it off, and because we used a small stitch, it is nice and perforated where I can just pull it off nicely, and then I'll do that to the other side. Our last step is to fold our stem piece right over on top of our pumpkin piece. And we know it's the top because we got the brown right here for the stem. So I'm going to fold it directly on top. And then I'm going to sew right on that black solid line to sew those 2 pieces together. Once everything is sewed, we can press it all open. And then now we just need to remove the papers on the back. And when removing the papers on the back, I like to start on the edge and work my way out, but you can choose to do whatever you want. And when ripping the papers out, you just want to be extra careful because you don't want that thread to break, or you don't want to tug it too hard to where it stretches a little bit and loosens your seam. And so I just like to pull it a little bit lightly. And on this middle piece that we glued down, if there is still some glue, you can just pull a little bit harder to pull it up, but I didn't put too much glue on it, so the pieces came up pretty easily. This part definitely takes the longest, for sure, but I feel like it's super rewarding. Then, once we've removed all the paper and pressed it nicely, you will have a block that looks like this, and it's absolutely beautiful. Now we've got 3 of the cutest pumpkin blocks, and just as a reminder, the pattern is in the description below. I hope you had so much fun and you make these pumpkin blocks. And if you do, make sure to tag us on social media. Make sure to tag me. I'd love to see it and cheer you on. And I'll see you next time.